everybody. Welcome. We're happy to see everyone after a little bit of time off. As you make your way in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you are new here, Michelle and I started this show in 2019. We are two SDS moms. No background in this. We had an idea to provide resources to patients and families around the world in an easy, digestible way. We did not want people to wait years to get to a medical conference or not be able to afford to get there. We wanted the information to be available when you needed it. Most importantly, we wanted your questions answered live. We devote 30 minutes of every show to questions.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Like Nicole said, we've missed everyone. We've been off for the past couple months because it was winter and dreary. But Nicole and I personally want to thank you for joining this webcast, whether you're a patient, a parent, or a support person. If you're here, you care about this disease and want to learn more or make a difference. So thank you. We encourage you to tag someone in the comments that you think should also be here. Send it to a friend who maybe forgot, who's out enjoying the sunshine. They might not catch it live, but they will see the replay on YouTube. If you're having trouble commenting, ensure you're logged into either Facebook or YouTube. We found that there's an issue sometimes with not being logged in.
We'll wait a few minutes to make sure everyone has made it and let us know where you found your joy this week.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where people found their joy this week. Where did you find your joy this week, Nicole?
I found it I had my book club meeting today, and I am already dressed as our book club main character. We read Eleanor
Love
and
it.
Elephant Completely Fine, and I think it's actually appropriate for this show because we're not always completely fine, but that was a
We're
good
not.
book.
We're not.
But I'm already dressed as the main character.
I love it. I found my joy this week because if you have ever traveled to the Midwest or been to the Midwest, you know that we have lots of seasons, and sometimes those seasons change every day. And I think we're in real spring now. All the snow is 94% of the snow is gone. And it was like 60 degrees and it was sunny and we had the windows open, and it's like my favorite time of the year.
And it is so humid in Houston where I am.
Yeah, that's rough for you. And you have a lot of snakes, apparently.
We were going to have Dr. Shimamura on today as well. However, she is under the weather, so we wish Dr. Shimamura a good recovery, and she has left us in capable hands.
Yeah, absolutely. We get the honor of having the more Midwest half of the registry with us today to present. Dr. Myers is a pediatric hematologist who has also never stopped searching for answers for our community, and she comes from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. If you've not seen these numbers on your screen yet, I think they're a great representation of what the registry does and how they've impacted things in the community. I think it's always astonishing. I remember back when we were celebrating 200 enrollees because I got cake in the hospital, and I will never ever forget that. It was very good. So at this time, I think we're going to welcome in Dr. Myers.
Hi, Dr. Myers.
Hi. We are so very excited to have you on, and we're very thankful for your time today. And I have to ask, because we asked everyone else, where did you find your joy this week?
This week I found my joy hanging out with my parents who don't live anywhere near me, with my son.
Oh, I love
in the
that.
sunshine.
Yeah.
In the sunshine. I'm a bit further south than I usually am today.
You're in real spring down there for real.
Yes, yeah, yes. Florida is much warmer than Ohio.
Hopefully when you come back, it'll still be real spring here and I didn't just jinx everything.
We're going to hand the floor over to the registry now, but please ask your questions in the comments as we will have time to go through them with the doctors. And please remember to keep them general, no private information.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you both for having me here today. I'm truly honored to be able to represent the registry for myself and Akiko and share with you guys some of the sort of work that the registry has been doing, who are we, what do we do, and what we're hoping to do for patients with Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome, moving forward. I'm just going to share my screen real quick here. And hopefully, can you tell me, are the slides filling the whole screen now? Hopefully, yes. So thanks again for having me to talk to you all about the US-based Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome Registry. And the registry has been active now almost for 15 years. We're very excited about that. And Looking forward to talking more about what exactly the registry is, what we do, and how we're helping patients today and in the future. So, what is the mission of the registry? Well, we really hope to advance cutting-edge research in the biology of Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. So, what is the underpinnings in each cell that cause trouble for patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome, and use that information to move forward the discovery for better treatments and therapies, and hopefully a cure for patients with SDS. We also want to act as a resource for clinical expertise for both patients and families, but also for medical professionals and researchers who may not be as experienced in Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And we want to be available to people to help get them that information in real time to help advance both care for patients as well as research. And it's important, and we'll talk about why in a second, to know that every patient counts. So in a rare disease, we need to have information about as many patients as possible to help us better learn and better answer questions that are really only answerable when you get information on a lot of different patients. So registry is like building a library of knowledge, and one book at a time. So each person is like a book in that library, and each person is absolutely critical to understanding the whole picture of what is Shwachman-Diamond syndrome so that we can advance medical care and move the research forward. If you think about it, some problems that patients with SDS have may be unique to them, and some problems that they have may be common to lots of other patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And the only way we are able to sort of figure that out is if we put patients' information together and sort of be able to compare what is more unique to one individual versus what is common amongst many patients with SDS. So joining the registry really helps us build this library of SDS knowledge and allows us to learn from the library to improve care for our patients. So what's involved in the registry? And here I'm showing images of the registry team all working in different capacities, both in Boston and in Cincinnati to get information. We do a lot of data collection. We take that data and de-identify it, meaning make sure it's not associated with a specific name, so that when we do research with other researchers and doctors, that we're not sharing personal or health information that's identifiable. And that is all stored in a HIPAA-compliant electronic database. And then we're also collecting samples. So for patients who are willing to donate samples of either blood or bone marrow at the time of a already scheduled procedure, so no extra pokes there. We collect these samples, and they are processed and stored in the central sample repository, which is housed in Boston. And these samples, and I'll show you some of the ways how, have really, along with the clinical data, really moved our understanding of Shwachman-Diamond syndrome forward by leaps and bounds, and have truly changed the way we care for our patients. So how does the registry work? Again, we talked about samples, medical records, and then obviously joining the registry or contacting the registry. And those are all different things that we do. If you're getting if you want to join the registry, on the registry website, there is a contact us button, and you'll get the image shown there on the far right. And that will allow you to send your information into the registry, and then we will call you to do consent over the phone. You can also email us directly, and the email address is there on the bottom, and share the same information. And this consent will then allow us to retrieve your medical records. You can send us medical records if you have them and you want to, but we will have you sign a medical release so that we do the work for you, contact the hospital, and get those medical records so that we can take the data and help move things forward. Similarly, if you are having a procedure like a bone marrow or a blood draw, we can send you a kit in the mail and that you can take to your doctor, and then your doctor can collect the sample along with your regular testing and send it into the registry for it to be put in the lab. So all of this to say that the only way to advance care for patients with SDS is through a partnership. And that partnership is between the registry and all of you, patients with SDS and their families. We really can't move things forward without that collaboration. And it's really important that we work together to help our patients live better lives. And here I'm going to show you, kind of moving forward from here forward, some of the things that we've learned through the registry and kind of the directions we're going. So one of the earlier things we learned and published in the registry is that the diagnosis of Shwachman-Diamond syndrome can be quite tricky. You all, as families, may say, we already knew this. It took us a while to get diagnosed. But actually, most doctors and physicians learn about Shwachman-Diamond syndrome from the textbooks, right? And what the textbooks will tell you about a patient with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome is that they must have neutropenia, they must have trouble growing, and they must have diarrhea. And if they don't have that constellation of symptoms, many doctors will not send the test for Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And actually, one of our earliest papers showed that half of patients do not, in fact, have the classic picture that you see in the textbook. And in fact, some patients have siblings who have no symptoms at all who get diagnosed with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome because of their symptomatic siblings. Why is this important? Well, this is important because this particular finding has led to broader testing by doctors. Doctors are more willing to send the testing for Shwachman-Diamond syndrome because we have proved that most patients don't actually read the textbook, and they do what they want on their own as far as symptoms. And so you have to have a higher index of suspicion and send more testing in order to correctly make the diagnosis. It also helps to get insurance coverage for that diagnosis because historically, oftentimes it was a challenge to get that coverage because the insurance companies would say you don't have the appropriate symptoms. Another paper that we have published, some learning we've done in the last few years, is looking at the evolution of blood problems in patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. What we've seen through the registry, and this is in over 150 patients with SBDS mutations, is that bone marrow failure that is severe enough for transplant usually happens pretty early in childhood. And later, as patients grow older, the risk of MDS and leukemia start going up. So most patients who are transplanted at younger ages are being transplanted for bone marrow failure. And as patients grow older, most patients are being transplanted for the concern of MDS or leukemia. We also were able to show that bone marrow cellularity, or how full the bone marrow is, does not always match patients' blood counts. And that's important because sometimes doctors get really nervous and families get really nervous when the bone marrow cellularity is very low. But actually, if the blood counts are okay, then we know now that we don't need to worry as much about that low cellularity. And so this particular research really helped us understand, what do we expect for the typical patient with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome over the course of many years and, in fact, decades of their lives. We then moved on to look at transplant outcomes in patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And here is an example where even the registry did not have enough data on patients with transplant for patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. So in fact, I went and initiated a study with the CIBMTR, which is the Center for International Bone Marrow Transplant Research here in the United States, to look at transplant information for patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And what we learned from this work was that transplant outcomes for patients with bone marrow failure are much better than they used to be. we have learned how to use more gentle chemotherapy regimens. They're still not fun, but they're more gentle than what we used in the past. And patients with bone marrow failure who get a transplant are doing much, much better. We also learned that we need to do a lot better for our patients with MDS and AML, and that the strategies that we're currently using are not good enough. And that's an area of that we're working on actively. And here's another slide that shows that outcomes for patients with MDS and AML are not what we want them to be. Patients with MDS and AML are not surviving as much as we would like them to be, and we really need new approaches to diagnose earlier and to treat this better. But more importantly, and this work is actually a collaboration that the registry did with 18 different institutions across 3 different countries to look at MDS and AML in our SDS patients. And while we showed that the patients with MDS and AML don't do as well as we would like them to be or to do, we did show that the patients who had bone marrow surveillance prior to their diagnosis of MDS or AML did better than those who did not. And that's an important piece to sort of guide our care and show how important it is that surveillance is in patients with SDS. So why is it important? And here's where I tell you how important those research samples, that blood and bone marrow that patients donate to the registry is. Together with the clinical data, Dr. Shimomura's lab in collaboration with Dr. Coleman Lindsley, who's also in Boston, was able to look back over time at bone marrow samples from patients with Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome, some of whom did not develop MDS or AML, and some of them who did. And this is a very complicated slide, but what we were able to figure out in sort of the very short version is that patients with SDS, their bone marrow is stressed. And they try to fix that stress to improve the bone marrow function by making small mutations that help the bone marrow work better. One of those mutations is an EIF6, which is a gene that helps the ribosome actually work a little better when it gets mutated in SDS patients. But the other gene is TP53. And TP53 is something that we've now been talking about for a couple of years, so you may have heard more about it. But that is a gene in your body that protects you from getting cancer. It turns cells off from growing too much. And in patients with SDS, it's called a tumor suppressor gene. And in patients with SDS, in order to help their bone marrow work more, they actually turn that gene off. And you have 2 copies of every gene. And so most patients with SDS during the course of their life do develop these tiny clones or little groups of cells that have these TP53 mutations. They're very common. But the sort of turning point, and this is what the research has discovered, is that if 2 copies get mutated, that's taken the brakes all the way off. And that's when the risk of developing MDS and leukemia goes way up. And so why is this important? Well, through this work, we have been able to identify that if we can surveil patients, do those bone marrows and look for those TP53 mutations and how they change over time, it may be able to allow us to intervene earlier with transplant and catch patients before they develop MDS or AML so that they can do better with their transplant therapy. So I told you that there is power in knowledge, in numbers and knowledge. And so in the last few years, the SDS Registry has led an international SDS consortium study. And we are poised to report the largest cohort ever reported of patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And that's almost 900 patients with biallelic SDS mutations. And this is across 14 different countries that I've shown you here. All of these collaborators working together to better understand what is the risk of leukemia in patients with SDS, and over time, how does that risk change, and how are the patients doing? And so we hope to have this data out in the coming year, and really hope to use this data to better treat and better educate patients patients and doctors across the globe to get better care for patients with SDS. We are also leading a updated version of the SDS consensus guidelines, and this is an effort that's by and large being led by Dr. Jane Koo in Cincinnati, who's been fantastic, getting all of the experts together, almost 60 experts internationally, and I think you guys had a podcast about this a little bit, so I'm not going to talk about it too much longer. But we had our initial meeting almost a year ago now in Cincinnati at the International Congress. We've had 2 additional virtual meetings, and the goal is to publish consensus guidelines in a well-respected journal, which will then serve as the standard of care for patients with SDS, both for their diagnosis and their clinical care, and hopefully improve outcomes for everybody. So that we have, a document that says, this is what the experts and this is what the data says on how to treat patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. We want to make that widely available to doctors and patients, reaching pediatric and adult doctors to help all of our patients. Will of course serve as reference to support insurance coverage in how some of the important things that we ask for are necessary for our patients with SDS. Just a few more things that we're doing and collaborations that we have ongoing. We have a study comparing surveillance in bone marrow versus peripheral blood in patients with SDS, trying to learn how we can use peripheral blood surveillance better to screen, because we know that bone marrows are challenging for patients, especially on a repeated basis, and also costly. We have helped support and facilitate a clinical trial for transplant in patients with SDS, and this is through the VMT-CTN here in the United States, using a triosulfan-based, which is a more gentle-based conditioning for bone marrow failure. I'm happy to report that that study is fully enrolled, and that actually more than 25% of the patients had Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. The study enrolled 40 patients, and 11 of those patients had Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. So that's super important in learning how to best transplant our patients and how to move the transplant field for patients forward better. There is under development another protocol for patients with bone marrow failure using triosulfan, because that first protocol was, for MDS and AML, because that first protocol was for patients with bone marrow failure. We're also working on several novel approaches for treating MDS and AML and identifying it earlier. Dr. Helen Reed in Boston recently also identified an increased risk of lymphoid cancer in patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome, so helping us know that we need to also look at the lymphoid compartment or a different type of white blood cell in patients with SDS, and also have an active project looking at adult patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome and how their symptoms change over time as they age. We have active work looking at all of these different medical complications in Shwachman-Diamond syndrome, and I've listed the different collaborators we have looking at liver complications. That was just actually accepted for publication, so should be in a journal available online within the next few weeks. A project looking at other GI complications, neurocognitive complications, and immune phenotypes, or how the immune system works in patients with SDS. We're, of course, collaborating on gene therapy for SDS with Dr. Bauer, as well as looking at new genes for those patients who are genetically undefined who have SDS, as well as more basic science research looking at the basic biology of patients with SDS as well. I'm not going to go through these studies, but these are just here to show you these are other research studies that the registry has been doing, in the past decade or so, advancing different aspects of SDS care, including diagnostics and clinical care as well. And then here's another page of these research studies trying to advance care for patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. So I mentioned we want to be a resource. We have an SDS board, which is made up of myself, Dr. Shimamura, and Dr. Chris Riley at the Dana-Farber, who is an adult hematologist. And this board is available to physicians who want to ask clinical questions and consult about their patients who have Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. We are able to share registry data with those physicians to help guide their care. We don't tell people what to do because we're not treating patients from a distance, but we can take the information they tell us about their patient's clinical situation and share our experience from the registry to give them sort of the most cutting edge information with which to move forward. We have applied for various funding to help us also move forward other treatment aspects, including small molecules for SDS as well as diagnostics. And then we're training the next generation of SDS investigators. I mentioned some of these folks, but not all of them in the previous slides. Dr. Jane Koo, Dr. Helen Reed, Dr. Felicia Andreasen, and Dr. Nick Laudy are all junior faculty who are active with the registry and working on learning more and more about patients with SDS and how to care for them as well. And what we really want to do is expand the number of people who one might say have expertise in Shwachman-Diamond syndrome, so that more people have an expert closer to home for their care. And we also plan on attending Camp Sunshine this summer in Maine, of course. So I've probably been talking too long, and really the most important part is getting your questions. But a special thanks to the patients and families and all registry participants, because really none of what I just talked about could be done without you. This is really, as I said, a collaboration. And you can see here, we are reaching out broadly across the world, really, to try to work with as many people as possible to get that work move forward and really move towards a cure for patients with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I just want to say I love the owl, the face it's making. I'm heavily distracted by it.
That is a
I think it's
slide.
I feel like I was put there just for me. I think we lost Dr. Myers. She should be right back. Until then, I wrote in here that we've been getting our bone marrow biopsies for 11 years, and we've submitted samples to the registry all 11 years, and not once have we had to have an extra poke, an extra sleep medicine, an extra anything. And so I like to think I'm well versed in the registry, and every time we have one of these shows, I learn something new.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say that. Roman just had his bone marrow biopsy Thursday, and I learned something. We've been through so many of these, and I learned something new. I'm just extremely excited about the world collaboration with all the other locations. That's really, really exciting.
I think that's amazing. We had a question come in during the show. Kristen asked, can I ask you to give an explanation of how bone marrow failure is different than MDS or AML? Doesn't one lead to the other?
Well, that's a great question. So bone marrow failure is it's not it's a process. And basically it is the bone marrow getting tired and running out of cells. And so if you think about your bone marrow as a factory, you have to have so much machinery in your factory to make red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. And over time, in patients with SDS, their machinery to begin with doesn't work as well. We know their ribosomes don't assemble like they should, and they don't produce protein as efficiently as they should because of that. But over time, this stress leads to less and less productive machinery, less and less productive cells in the bone marrow. And that's what we're talking about with failure. So the number of cells in the bone marrow is decreasing over time. And since the bone marrow is your factory to make your blood, then the number of cells of your blood start to also decrease over time. And when you get severe bone marrow failure, that is when we talk about needing a bone marrow transplant. But if your blood counts are sort of mildly abnormal, you still have bone marrow failure, but you just have mild bone marrow failure or moderate, which is sort of in the middle. And that can happen for years, decades of time for patients with SDS, if that makes sense. Now, MDS and AML is different in the way it can lower your blood counts. So in that way, it's similar. But it's really when those cells start making a mistake and start accumulating more and more genetic mistakes, kind of like that TP53 mutation I was talking about, but can be other mistakes as well. And those mistakes start taking the brakes off from cell division or growth. And so it's sort of a bit the opposite of bone marrow failure, because those cells grow when they shouldn't, and they take over the bone marrow space and don't allow for normal production of blood. And you say, if they're taking over the space and the space is a factory, shouldn't you get higher blood counts? And sometimes you do, actually. Some patients with leukemia have very high white blood cells. But for the most part, those cells that have those mutations or mistakes, they don't work as well. So even though they're taking up the space, they're actually not producing much cells at all. So in the end, you can still have low blood counts, which is similar to bone marrow failure, but it's for the sort of a different reason. It's because your factory's kind of gone awry and is not making things like it should.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm always amazed how you guys could answer things in a way that we actually understand them. Thank you. Stacy wrote, she's from New Zealand. Those from other countries like New Zealand can't send samples because it's the North American registry. She says, how else can we help the registry?
Right. Thank you for asking. There are several registries worldwide. And so I would encourage, if you're in a country that has a registry, I would encourage you to join your registry, because we are collaborating with those registries, as you can see from some of the things I talked about. And so the US-based registry will also be able to take advantage of your joining those registries, because we're trying to share data in a de-identified way, of course. If your country does not have a registry, you can reach out to us and we can talk about whether it makes sense to have you join the US-based registry. We have had some patients from countries in which there is not a registry nearby join the US registry and send clinical data, but not samples, because yes, there are a lot of international regulations around sending samples across borders, and so that gets a bit tricky. And then finally, the registry is also happy to have your support financially as well. If you go to the registry website, there's a link to donate, and that link goes to a site that says Boston Children's, but it does go directly to the registry when you click that button. It doesn't go to Boston Children's in general.
That's really good to know. Leah is from Australia, and Leah said, I find it interesting that hypocellular marrow doesn't correlate to low blood counts. Do we only need to be concerned about hypocellular marrow if the blood counts drop below the normal range?
Yeah, that's a great question. Over time, marrow cellularity changes. And if you think about your bone marrow like your grass in your garden, it doesn't all grow at the same rate, right? Some areas look better than others. Even though I put a lot of effort and put some grass seed out there, they don't always grow the same. And so if you think about your bone marrow, and especially bone marrows that are stressed, different parts can grow better than others. And so when you stick a needle in for the bone marrow biopsy, even if you're sticking it through the same place in the skin, doctors usually try to angle it differently so that you're not always taking it from the same place in the bone, if that makes sense. And so you may be hitting different sections of the bone marrow itself, and so you may hit one time a little bit of a less happy area that's not growing as well, and one that's the next time one that's a little bit more full. We follow trends over time. So, sometimes we do see that change over time, and that can be something to watch, especially if it's going upwards in a very quickly direction and there are other things that might worry us. But if the blood counts are okay, you don't really need a ton of cells actually in your bone marrow to keep your blood counts relatively normal. Those stem cells in the bone marrow are pretty amazing, and you only need a few to make enough blood. Yeah.
Good question. Another question that came in is, what is the best way to financially support the research projects that the registry is connected to? Would working with the hospital's fundraising teams be beneficial?
Yes, actually, that would be fantastic. If you, obviously you can donate directly through the link on the website. But if you have a particular project that you're interested in supporting, if you reach out to Dr. Shimamura or myself, we can work with our hospital fundraising folks as well with you about whatever it is that you're most interested in moving forward. And you can, if you reach out and donate directly through us and tell us what it is that you're looking for, we will obviously make sure that money goes exactly to where you're intending it to go. That's one of the big things in research ethics is, if a donation is given with a directed intent, that money goes there.
I lost Michelle. She says, I set up a fund for the gene therapy project through Boston Children's. Is this a good thing to share with the community if they're interested in helping to fundraise?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's more power in having more information out there. And the gene therapy project is moving forward nicely, but is very expensive. And so I think it would be fantastic to share with the community, and as much interest as we can get is really super helpful. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
I didn't type it in the chat, but I have a question. I'm very excited for the looks of this this portal to share information between hospitals. We often utilize more than one children's hospital. We see both Cincinnati and our home hospital, and
Yeah.
sometimes sharing records is not easy. It's as easy as one might think. It's not as quick as easy as sending an email. So what does that look like for, let's say, someone in a rural area who needs access to be able to tell their doctors how to find you? Is there a place on the website? Is there a jot form? How do we make that connection for them?
You mean as far as your doctor connected to us?
Yep.
Yep. So the best way to do that is to give your doctor our information directly.
Okay.
It is easier to have a communication between doctors if it is one physician reaching out to the expert rather than the expert reaching out to tell you what to do. Does that make sense?
Nope, that makes sense.
So oftentimes, if you want to share the registry website and the thing about contact, or you can just give them our emails directly.
Okay.
I get emails probably several times a day from doctors around the world, really, to ask questions about their patients with SDS. And that's the fastest and easiest way to get a hold of us. But if you email the registry with a clinical question, then the registry staff will also hunt us down, and we will reach out to your doctor. So either way, whatever is easier for you. Yeah.
Perfect. I just wasn't sure if there was a new way to send it, based off the slide that you had said that there's now the board, or in the works of the board of it, and
yeah.
so not necessarily over emailing one doctor over another, where there was like a filter system.
So if you ask a question that is that is sort of nuanced, that isn't like very straightforward, actually we will automatically convene the board for you.
Perfect.
So if your doctor reaches out and says, I have this patient with SDS, they got a bone marrow, there's a TP53 mutation, do you think this is one that is okay to watch, or this is one that we need to do something about? Because that's now becoming a very common question, because we know patients with SDS have TP53 mutations, and not all of them need to be acted on immediately. Some of them can be watched. And so that's an example of, if we get that question, we convene the board, we get information about the patient, and we sort of give data from the registry to help inform that that clinical care.
Yeah. We got a question from someone. They said, you mentioned working on new surveillance guidelines. Do you anticipate that the next generation sequencing, the blood test used to scan DNA for mutations like TP53, will be included as a standard recommendation, either to supplement or replace annual bone marrow biopsies?
I do anticipate that will be a recommendation, yes. The consensus guidelines are still in process. They're not finalized yet, although we're almost there.
So close.
But the data is very strong to support including TP53 NGS sequencing in surveillance. And so you can do that both in blood and bone marrow. The nuances of how that works is kind of what the group is trying to settle on at the moment. And that is something that I think over time may change as technology gets better and our sensitivity gets better. But this is a huge leap forward from what we were doing, 5 years ago.
Oh, definitely. 100%.
Oh, can I ask a question real quick? Dr. Myers, I wanted, both Michelle and I were at the Congress. Can you speak a little to the changes in funding nationally, I'd say, like the NIH changes and how it impacts the registry?
Yes, thank you for asking that. The funding environment at the moment is very, very challenging. Budgets from the NIH have been limited. And the turnaround time also for reviewing grants has become a little longer. So even when you put a grant in, the time to hearing back about whether or not you get the money is longer, and the amount of money is less. So it is going to be more challenging in the coming years, at least the foreseeable future, to get money to support work for the registry. And the NIH really only funds specific questions that they find scientifically interesting. They don't fund the daily work of the registry. So they're not going to fund us to extract data and put it in the database or to process samples. They're only going to fund the science that comes from that data and that comes from using those samples. And so that's one of the challenges actually of running a registry is, we obviously need to pay for those other things first so that we can get to the science. And so both of those things are important.
So this disease is very rare, and now the money is even less.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, on that note, we had a question come in that said, how would you say to navigate with a hematologist who is opposed to annual bone marrow biopsies?
Ooh.
Been there, done that.
Yes. So if your hematologist is open to conversation, I would say that please refer them, ask them if they would be willing to talk to Dr. Shimamura and I and Dr. Riley, even just to have a conversation. Because we obviously, like I said, we're not telling people what to do with their patients from a distance, but we can provide the data that helps them inform their decision. And so a lot of times, people just aren't aware as much of the data behind why we make those recommendations. Hopefully, also, once we publish the consensus guidelines, that's one of the reasons why we feel so strongly it needs to be in a well-respected journal, because doctors, in general, when they read publications in well-respected journals, especially if they're guidelines, which say this is what the experts want you to do, will modify their care or listen to those guidelines. Sort of as a last resort, if you really can't come to consensus with your doctor, uh, we can help you find some maybe somebody else nearby, or I would try somewhere else that might be willing to listen. I tell people all the time, you get 2 or 3 opinions on who's going to change the roof on your house. You can get more than one opinion on your healthcare. And any physician that is offended by somebody seeking a second opinion, especially in a rare disease, in my opinion, needs to reevaluate their practice.
I think that was worded very wonderfully, because
Yeah.
Caitlin, we have been in that position and we have had Dr. Myers write a very strongly worded letter, and it eventually worked, sort of.
I was also thinking just a diagnosis, because we had to change
Oh, yeah.
doctors just to get a diagnosis because our first doctor was not listening to us,
Mm.
or just that something seemed
Yeah.
wrong,
Mhm.
and that saved his life. I'm
Yeah.
curious. I don't know if you could tell us yet, but with all these different registries, is any data, you may not be able to tell us, but is any data popping out like this region has something different happening, or is SDS kind of looking universally the same around the world?
Yeah, so I would say this. I probably I can say that I don't think there's any differences in patients who have Shwachman-Diamond syndrome from one part of the world to the other,
Okay.
from what we can tell. And that caveat is because in some places the numbers are very small, and in some places the numbers are bigger. For example, the U.S. based registry is the larger registry, and because the U.S. population is larger. But and the French registry and the German registry actually had a lot of patients to contribute. But many other smaller countries, countries in the East or Australia, the numbers are smaller. So it, statistically making those comparisons is hard, but we haven't noticed differences. Yeah.
Okay.
I had a follow-up question to the follow-up question from the follow-up question. On that slide, it said there were biallelic, you were monitoring over 900 genetic patients. Is there a plan to include non-genetic or clinically diagnosed patients in the future for the plan? I don't know how to word that right.
Yeah, yes, I know what you're asking. Um, I think for a study like this, that is
Oh, yeah.
challenging, because mostly because we want to make sure we're comparing similar situations.
Mhm.
And so, other patients with other mutations like SRP54, EFL1, and DNA JC21 have an SDS like phenotype. We did not include them in this study because they behave actually differently in some aspects than patients who have SBDS mutations. And so it's very hard to make generalizations, or to unify those patients. And so for the genetically undefined patients, we don't know if we're grouping people appropriately. And so we're aiming our focus in that area in gene discovery. And Dr. Reed is actually working on some nice work that should come out in the next year or so. I think looking at patients who have features of SDS or aspects of SDS in the registry, who actually we've sort of been able to find different related but not quite related disorders. And so, making sure that we're appropriately guiding the care is important. And so I think that's for the best way to do that.
I saw her
Oh,
poster
definitely.
at the Congress. Is she at Texas Children's?
I believe she did her residency there, but she's at Boston Children's now. Yeah.
Got it.
She did her fellowship training at Boston Children's and has stayed on as faculty.
Can you speak to, so like you spoke about the French and Italian registries, they're automatically enrolled, correct? Because of their healthcare system. Is that correct to say? Or
Um,
because we like have to voluntarily remember to
yes,
send it in every
yes.
year. Okay.
In the United States, it is voluntary enrollment for sure. I believe I can't really speak to the way international registries
Mm,
practice, but I think they have access to the healthcare information in a different way, since it's a national healthcare.
right.
So I believe they're able to identify and approach patients
Mm-hmm.
easier than in the United States. But I do still think they have to have some consent, unless it's done in a retrospective way.
Okay, right. Consent. What are the greatest challenges with our type of healthcare system where maybe someone remembers 2 years, doesn't remember 3 years, tries to jump back in? Is there challenges for y'all without longitudinal data on that same patient?
Yes and no. Oh, every bit of data helps, to be
Mm,
honest. It is best to have all like the most full picture. But even if we don't have the full picture, the we can aggregate that data in a way that makes it informative.
got it.
And so I guess it's hard to, what is the most challenging is that people seek their care in different places. They move, they get a new doctor for variety of reasons, and we have to then figure out where it happened, when it happened, and get the data. And so that can oftentimes be a little time consuming. It's worth it, but if you consent for us to, if you release the medical records and you consent for research with released medical records, then we can do the legwork. It's more complicated in the US than it is abroad, where it's just that one system. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
One system.
Any,
I don't
any
think
other questions?
I don't listen. Last call. Last call. I think it's always I know we've had the registry on before, and it's sometimes it's kind of like, oh, do we have to have the registry on again? But there's always such new information that you guys are putting out and putting together, and I think it changes every time. I've never not learned something after what, 4 or 5 years, Nicole.
I
I've
think
never.
the biggest question I get personally about the registry is, especially to me. So my son, for those of you who do not know my story, my son did not have a bone marrow match. So I did a ton of work with Be the Match, now NMDP. So that's another registry. So people get confused, what is which one? I'm in this one. I'm not sure which one I'm in. So this is the North American SDS Registry. So thank you to everyone who contributed. Thank you so much, Dr. Myers, for
Yes.
joining us on your spring break.
Absolutely.
On spring break.
I know. Sending well wishes to Dr. Shimamura, quick recovery. And thank you to
Yes.
Greg, our behind the scenes tech engineer who helps this show run flawlessly.
Yes.
The registry wouldn't be able to do groundbreaking work they do without us. Take a screenshot of the QR code.
The QR code's coming in a second. Bye, Dr. Myers.
Bye, Dr. Myers.
There you go. Now
It
it's
will
there.
take you to a page filled with information about the registry, how you can submit your samples to help them continue their work, and ways you can help fuel the future for patients.
Like I said this before, we have sent in our samples for nearly 11 years. It's such an easy process. Even on the days we forgot our kit, we've just emailed Boston, and they They were able to make it work. It's such an easy process. It requires no extra pokes, no extra sedation, no extra procedures. It's all done when you're already getting work done with your annual bone marrow biopsy.
You could find our shows on YouTube. Reminder, this is intended to build a resource library for you when you need it. Maybe you need to watch it multiple times. Maybe you need to watch this later. But the bigger thing is you know where to find information.
Absolutely. And part of our mission of the show is to let you know that you're still allowed to smile. Your self-care is critical. We live in a tough world. You got to laugh a little sometimes. Not just self-care, but radical self-care. We hope to leave you with something to smile about after every show. Some weeks it might be good news from the community. Maybe there's a funny affirmation from a patient or a caretaker or a doctor. And some weeks it might be 3 tips to thrive with SDS.
Today we have 2 amazing kiddos with some great advice on how you can be your best self. You'll get to hear from Nora and Kayla, 2 SDS patients out of Long Island who are thriving despite living with SDS and the complications it brings.
And don't forget to follow us on all the platforms that you'll see at the end of the video. You can log on to our live shows from Facebook or YouTube for live broadcasts. The replay is usually on YouTube the same night, next day, and then follow us on your preferred social media. And we are now a podcast officially, so you can find us on all your podcast platforms as well.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Bye. Have a good weekend.
Three to thrive. 3 tips to help be your best, even when it's hard.
We have 3 pieces of advice for you. I'll go first. I think it's really good to eat healthy. Only sometimes you can eat unhealthy things. If you eat healthy, you'll grow big and strong. Number 2 is exercise. It's very important that it's good to exercise because you're gonna get big and strong too. If you're scared at your doctor appointment, hold somebody's hand that's next to you and it'll make you feel braver. And hold each other's hands. So that'll make them more brave. And that'll be kind of you to do that. That's our advice. See you later.